we'll look at the NBA D League and look at minor league baseball. I mean, minor league baseball has done a great job in carving out local support in a lot of mid-market areas, but that local support means, you're breaking attendance records if you're averaging, 7,000 people a game. And so it's just a complete other level. It's not a spectacle. Minor league sports are not a spectacle. And the other problem you have to deal with in minor league sports that you would also deal with in an AAF is the transient nature of the players. These players, the second they get the opportunity to go to the NFL, they're gonna do it. They're gonna, and I guarantee you, even without that opportunity, you're gonna see a lot of turnover on these teams over the next year or two as they kind of figure things out. And I think it's always going to be a problem. As a fan, and I get it, the NFL can trade a player at any moment. They can, turn over their roster at any moment. But you still feel like that's your guy or that's your team, and they're going to be a part of your team for this year. Maybe they got a 4-year contract, that sort of thing. Whereas on these sorts of minor league teams, NBA teams, D-League teams, the players are really tossed around like cattle in a bad way. And so for a fan, you're getting behind a team name only. And to your point about going to the games with your parents and going to the games with your grandparents, I've always said that's an undervalued part when somebody says, I'm being exploited because without me, you don't have a product that made all this money on the field. Well, actually, 100,000 people go to a Tennessee game or go to an Oklahoma game or a Texas A&M game because generationally it's been happening for 100 years. And that team has had the history of ups and downs and fan interest and money invested from that university into that program and from the boosters in that program over decades and decades and decades. And if you take that one player off of that team or take the top 10% of talent off that team, fans are still going to show up. I remember watching, I think it was a Duke. I think Duke had a series with Alabama about, it was during the Shula era. Somebody posted a link on YouTube about how Alabama was selling that game out. Alabama selling out a Duke game in a year that they went like 4-7. Alabama went like 4-7. That's because it didn't really matter about the players that were on the field. It mattered about the name that was on their jersey. And so I think you made a really good point there too.
Yeah. And I think something that's pretty notable in the AAF is, so the AAF was pretty smart about it. They structured the way that they took in players such that they picked 3 or 4 schools per region, per team. And they said these schools are assigned to the team, and they did it at a couple different levels. So for example, if you were a player at the University of Tennessee, if that was your most famous thing, then you went to play for Memphis's team. And if you were a player at the University of Alabama or Auburn University, you're playing for the Birmingham Iron. What that did is it drew a lot of the eyeballs and attention they have gotten, because the surrounding fans in that area know who those players were because they played for whatever sport it is. I don't know that you're going to ever really be able to completely replace that if you don't have the college stuff in front of it. And I think people don't, even where the AAF is at, and it's not like the AAF is necessarily, the most successful thing on planet Earth, but it's pretty darn successful. I don't know that it would be where it's at right now if it wasn't for the fact that so many fans go to these games because they know these players from where they were in college.
That's ironic.
Right. It's actually kind of funny the way that works, right? And the AAF structured it around the idea that, either the players played for one of the college teams in the area, or especially in the markets that are more larger markets, they're players that formerly played for an NFL team in that area. But they actually prioritize where they played college ball. So I just don't think you're going to get the same recognition. I think even the AAF, at the levels it's at, is actually still leveraging the fact that these guys played for a college team. To your point, it's a little different than the pros where you follow a player and he moves from team to team and you kind of become a fan of him. And there's certainly guys like Tom Brady, though they're few and far between. In college, these guys are, that guy was an Alabama player and he will be forever. That guy was a Tennessee player and he'll be forever. Jake Fromm will always be viewed as a Georgia player. Whether he gets hopped around as a backup quarterback isn't going to matter. He will always be a Georgia Bulldog. And a lot of what fans go to look at is associated with that. And if these players are divorced from an identity tied to a particular team, if Kyler Murray is not viewed as an Oklahoma player, and he's even an interesting case because you can say, well, he played at Texas A&M, but he established himself at Oklahoma. It's going to be hard to see where some of those guys are, and we're going to start to see it in college a little bit. And it's going to be kind of interesting with guys like, speaking of Oklahoma, Jalen Hurts. I mean, how is he going to be viewed by the Alabama fan base and the Oklahoma fan base? If he goes to Oklahoma and tears it up this year, then he's probably going to be pretty popular. But if he goes to Oklahoma this year and he's really mediocre, and let's say he gets benched, I do genuinely wonder how that's going to affect his career.
That's a really good point, and I hate that we didn't lead with that, so all the people that drop off after the first 10 minutes aren't going to get to that. Jalen Hurts, free agent in college football this year. If he could go play in the AAF for a bridge year to the NFL and make $75,000 versus going to Oklahoma, I guarantee you he'd pick going to Oklahoma. So you can't say that Jalen Hurts is being exploited and he couldn't. And again, this is hypothetical. He might go to the AAF, but I guarantee you he wouldn't. Guarantee you he wouldn't. You can't say that it's worth. He's bringing all the value to the table. They're making money on his back and he's being exploited, when if he was presented with the option of playing in the AAF right now or playing for Oklahoma this year, I 100% guarantee you he'd go to Oklahoma.
And you bring up exploitation, so that's sort of a side point that we're kind of benchmarking this against. But I want to be real clear here that the question on the table is, are these kids better off with the AAF? How would it affect them if minor league football was a bigger thing? And the point we're making here is really, even if that existed, Jalen Hurts in the current environment with the AAF being here, he still is going to want to play for Oklahoma. So in this reality, if we actually created a D-League sports team and we said, okay, we're going to pay these players, the first thing we talked about is, I don't think you're going to really necessarily pay these players that much money. And especially with the fact that they're going to be lesser known and not get the endorsement deals. They're not going to have as many people at the events, which means the teams don't generate as much revenue. Like you see with minor league baseball, they're not going to make crazy money while you're there. And if that's the case, then they're not losing out by a lot compared to going to play college sports financially. And there's the fact that they get, potentially better training and exposure in college. I don't think that's ever going to change because of how many people are tied to their college teams. And I think the final conclusion that I kind of reach with that is, to your point, I don't know that the minor leagues does damage. I don't think it's a bad thing for players to have the avenue to go play for those teams. There are certainly guys playing college football that their families desperately need money. They have medical issues. They come from families that don't have a lot of money at all, and so they need basic necessities. And for them, just being able to have access to $70,000 in actual funds could be a godsend for their family, and that availability would be a good thing. I don't think it would ever draw that many players from high-level college football. And even the really big players that people think would move over and sign an endorsement deal, maybe that would happen once or twice, but I think they would go over to the AAF, and they wouldn't, in that environment, in the semi-pro environment, I don't think they'd be able to shine enough, and they wouldn't have enough exposure, and I think it would kind of peter out. And what you would see would be kind of like minor league baseball. I don't know that there's a real comparison, but maybe, like D-League or European League basketball compared to college basketball, where players don't really do that too much unless they have a particularly good reason, just because the exposure isn't as good and the training isn't as good and the money's not necessarily worth it compared to what they can get if they just go play college.
So is there a model that works for everyone, and is this the model? So is minor league baseball actually the model, in that you can sign an NFL contract out of high school, you don't play in the NFL until 3 years after college or 3 years after high school, so you got to be 21 years old or more. That's developmental, physical, reality, where you're not making, right now we have everybody makes the same in the AAF. But if we went to the Major League Baseball model, it's you might be a millionaire or you might be a washed up NFL player who's still got a little skill and you're making 75 grand a year. Is that the best model, or is that a model that now we get into a potential to really hurt college football? And but also, does it matter? Like, if it hurts college football, does that necessarily mean that we care? Like, maybe it's just, if it's best for the players, then that's where we got to go.
This is a really interesting scenario, and I've actually been sitting here kind of thinking about it throughout this discussion. It's kind of interesting to think about how this would work, right? Because if you're Trevor Lawrence was kind of the prototype of a guy that would be signed to the NFL coming out of high school. Pretty rare. 5-star player, kind of viewed as the next Peyton Manning. Incredible tangibles in terms of size and strength, and incredible amounts of, and also incredible levels of skill as a passer, and very high levels of intangibles in his understanding of the game. If he were coming out of high school, he could probably be offered a multi-million-dollar contract by the NFL. But the problem with him is when he's going to go somewhere like the AAF, they are not going to want that kid getting injured. They're going to do everything in their power to make sure Trevor Lawrence doesn't get touched. They're going to put him on a team where he's being developed for 3 years. And they're basically going to encase that kid in bubble wrap. And he's not going to see the light of day until he gets to the NFL. And this gets way back to my conversation about Kyler Murray. It's kind of interesting in that you assume that he's going to be better off that way. I think the problem is your Trevor Lawrence that's been encased in bubble wrap, they're not going to pay a fortune for Trevor Lawrence if he's come out of high school. And, just like the minor league contracts, they're going to sign him to a $5 million contract for Trevor Lawrence to play in the minor leagues. But then they're going to sit and they're going to do everything possible for him not to get injured. And they're going to wait for him to get to the NFL after 3 years and hope he's been developed, give him a little bit of game time. And he's going to, at that point, already be signed into a contract in the NFL. And he's looking at his second contract in the NFL before he can make real money. He might actually make more money by coming out of college where he's already proven himself and everybody's having a bid on him than he would have gotten out of high school. And that's Trevor Lawrence, who's a superstar. Most of these kids out of high school, there is way too much uncertainty with college football players for them to be throwing around a ton of money. NFL players don't make the kind of money that an MLB player does at a high level. So the MLB gives good contracts for these kids out of high school, but they're also doing it with an eye to the fact that they've got guys that are making, hundreds of millions of dollars, right, as MLB players, so they can afford to throw a few million at these kids. Your Quinnen Williams kind of guys that were not 5 stars, that are 3 stars and 4 stars, and are going sort of the top end of the draft. They're not going to get any of these contracts, and they're going to know they're going to miss out on these kids. Remember, 5-star high school players, it's about a 20 to 30% chance that they actually get drafted.
And that's with world-class, development, training, resources, etc.
Right. So you have to bear in mind that they're not going to get huge contracts to play in a minor league for a few years, and especially given the fact that they need to play to get experience, and if they're playing, they're going to have a risk of injury in the minor leagues just like they would in college. That means you're not going to offer them as much money even still, because you may be giving money to a kid that's going to get hurt and never play past that point. And that some of the best players are always these 3-star kids nobody's looking at, and they're all going to still come out of the college ranks. So if you're a 5-star like Trevor Lawrence, you're looking at it and going, okay, I can go to the minor league and have some guaranteed money, or I can go to Clemson and have a chance. If I actually make it in Clemson in 3 years, I'll go pro and I'll make double or triple what I made coming out of the minors. Most of the kids that go first round are not 5-star players. They're all going to go to college anyway. And there's enough 5-star guys. There are high 4-star guys that are uncertain. They're not going to get a huge contract. I don't know that it's ever going to, I don't know how much that would really actually hurt college as a model. I think it may be good for certain kids that really need access to the money. I think those kids may end up hurting themselves, honestly, because they may get what they think is, like a $400,000 contract. And that's a lot of money to kids in that situation, and they feel like it's going to turn their family around. $400,000 is a lot of money. $400,000 is not a lot of money to hand someone who's not going to have a college degree if they don't make it to the NFL and now their family essentially has to live on that $400,000 for the rest of their life because they have no education and no skill set, and they don't have the attachment with universities. They're not going to be able to get a real job. And you can't, even at a really low income level, $400,000 does not go very far if you have to live on that money for the next 60 years. So I don't know that it's really better for the players. I think what it could help is having access to the AAF for guys that are in college or guys that desperately need the money and need to trade out to go to the NFL afterwards. But for the most part, I think these kids are going to be hurting themselves by not getting an education. And I think the kids that have the real potential are still going to go to college because they're going to get more exposure. And then they're going to be looking for a much higher NFL contract if they're a first-round draft pick than they would have gotten as guaranteed money out of high school.
So we got to wrap this up. We've talked a long time about this, but I think it's been a good discussion. To end this, I'll let you kind of close with your thoughts. As we've talked this out, in my mind, I feel like the best case scenario is to have some sort of AAF style minor league, D-league system to give the kids that need the money the most an option for an outlet, because it does two things. One, it gives them that outlet, and two, it shows how much people really value the college, not necessarily just the education, but the college athletics experience. And there is value there beyond the money. Right now, everything's in hypothetical land, so they don't have that proof of actual results of people choosing college over money to show that there's value there. So everybody gets to kind of play both sides of it, which hurts the college game perception. So I feel like, in my opinion, having this as an option and showing that nobody's taking it sort of proves all the like college players don't necessarily need to get paid people right. In your mind, is that the case as well? Or do you, if you had to plan a way or pick a way to design the whole thing, you do it differently?
So it's tough for me to do, but I'm trying to do this quickly and hit 2 points. The first is, I don't think it would really hurt college that much, and it would be a good thing to have this, just because, like you said, it's an option and an outlet for kids that desperately need the money immediately. And I know from people I know that were coaches and have been associated with players, there's a lot of these players that go pro early, and you kind of scratch your head and you wonder, why the heck are they going pro? And they're literally going pro early because their parents are starving. It's a thing. And there's some of these kids that desperately need money, and they go pro early. They don't get drafted, and they make a practice squad because they're that desperate to get some amount of money today, and they'd be better off being able to go to a minor league where they could be developed and they don't waste their one shot. However, I don't think I think, by the way, if you did that, it would be really it would look bad and like it would damage college initially, because some players would decide to go play for the minor league for that amount of money, and I think that would last about 2 to 3 years before they realize it's not worth it financially, and everybody just goes back to college. What I think would actually be the best thing, really, is, and I can't believe I'm saying this to a certain extent, but Josh Rosen did partner with an attorney who created an idea for a clearinghouse for how players could be receive endorsements, and I think that model was really good. And what it essentially did was, you create a clearinghouse. If you want to license a shoe for Nike as a player, you go to Nike and you do the signing agreement, but it actually goes through the NCAA, or it goes through this, really, they want to create a third-party clearinghouse. The clearinghouse signs the endorsement deals. The clearinghouse clears it, approves it. They manage all the contracts. They get a certain cut, let's say 5 to 10% of it, so they're incentivized to give the best agreements they can get. The player gets some small amount of it. It could be none. It could be like 5 to 10% of the endorsement deal. Some chunk goes to the university, to the general fund, maybe 20%. And then the remainder, the bulk of the money, and it might be 60 to 80% of the money, goes into a giant pot for everybody at that level of football. So everybody gets that money from the endorsement deal. The player gets a little bit to incentivize him to do the deal. The clearinghouse and the universities get a little bit. So everybody's able to get some extra money. That gives all these kids enough money to be able to feed their family, that kind of thing.
Probably gets you around Title IX too.
Right, and it probably does get you around Title IX. It gets you around a lot of the tax issues that exist. It wouldn't be a ton of money for any of these individual players. The truth is, there's, and now that I actually have time to think about it, it's about 11,000 players playing college football. the math of that's going to work out where maybe it's like 10,000 a year or 20,000 a year, truth be told, because there's so many players that the money gets spread out so much. But even that amount of money is pretty big deal to these kids. And if everything else is covered in their lives, that's a good amount of money to live on and do what they want, or a decent chunk of money to send to their family to support basic necessities if their family desperately needs it. I think that's the best solution. And then, something else we may get into at a certain point. We're talking about whether we're going to do a show, but that's probably also the one solution where someone could do a deal to reinvent the old college video game, because all of a sudden now you got to wait a contract with every college football player in the game. And that's the only way you're going to ever be able to open another video game.
Yeah, if you clear a path for them, the whole case was, as you know, centered around them not having a path to make money on their likeness while someone else did. If you clear a path for that, I can see it working. I just wish that anybody besides Josh Rosen would have come up with this, because I can't stand the guy, and he's so smug, and he played the whole, this is the thing I hate, and this is why, I want to be able to have a discussion about this
Rant alert.
Talk about what?
It said rant alert. Keep going, man. Keep going.
I want to be able to have a discussion about this and talk about it from both sides and be sympathetic or empathetic to all parties at the table. But when you have a journalist or a player, I think it was a player a couple years ago, a Tennessee player, who was like, I'm playing D1 football and I'm starving and I'm hungry and my school is making billions of dollars off of my back and I'm going hungry and there's no food in my fridge. That is when the brakes on the discussion stop for me, because that's not reality. You're not going hungry as a D1 athlete. You're, especially at Tennessee, you're eating steak and lobster whenever you want it. So
unless you need to be not eating steak and lobster and you're hungry because you need to lose weight.
Yeah, if you're cutting weight. So let's not make it out to be like these guys live horrible lives and they're totally exploited by the university. These guys live like kings and they have all the social capital in the world. They get per diem, they get travel money. I think there is an argument to be made about how it can be tight, given that you don't have a lot of time to find a job, in the summer and all that, especially with how the year-round calendars go. And I think there's an argument to be made for people that need an outlet for their family for money now. But these discussions don't get to be had because these players get nothing out of it. They're being exploited. College makes a ton of money. Well, like you said, only a handful of them are even turning a profit. So I want to be able to have this broader discussion without all the ridiculousness that comes in with it. But it seems like now, today in our society, it's all, flamethrowers or bust. So, Josh, anything else on this real quick? We're closing in on an hour on this discussion. Probably going to have to chop it up into two parts. Anything else real quick on the way out?
No, I don't think so. You think you promised me 20 minutes for this one, and we're going in an hour. So
well, but we talked for 20 minutes. I didn't lie about that. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for hanging with us this long. Please let us know in the discussions what you think the best solution would be for solving this problem, and is the AAF a potential solution? Like I said in the open, we had a really good discussion with RJ Young, who's got a really up and coming and is already kind of arrived channel on YouTube discussing mostly Oklahoma, but he's a great college football nerd. He's an honorary nerd. We'll put him in there. So that content's coming later this week. So look out for that. Gonna try to keep the off-season content coming. Josh has been really busy. I've got a baby coming in the next month, so I don't know how available I'm going to be, but we're going to try to make it happen. We've got some great ideas for off-season content. We just haven't had a lot of time. So again, thanks so much for hanging with us this long. Get at us in the comments. Have a great week, y'all, and God bless.